Hello, everybody, and welcome to the 167th edition of the Frank and Stan chat. And I have to say, there are some sort of weeks where, I'm always excited about doing these chats, but we don't always have such eminent guests. So I'm delighted to say that Professor Andy Hargreaves is joining us from Canada. Whereabouts in Canada? Just remind me again, Andy.
I am coming from Ottawa, which is, as we say here, is on the unceded and unsurrendered territory of the Anishinaabe people, and that we pay huge attention after over a century of disgrace. We're really trying to make amends for that now.
Brilliant, brilliant. And just for those of you who don't know who Andy is, and I have to say, Stan and I know Andy very well. Originally, for me, from reading some very influential sort of books on leadership during my early years as a head teacher. But Andy's the visiting professor at the University of Ottawa. He's a research professor at the Boston College in the States. He's an elected member of the US National Academy of Education. He's the former advisor in education for the Premier of Ontario, and he's the current advisor, I think, for the First Minister of Scotland. Is that still the case, Andy?
Yeah, there's a bunch of us. It's not just me.
Brilliant.
There's a bunch of us, and in fact, I have just written a paper called a chapter on how to be an international education advisor, and it's quite short, but one of it is if you're in policy, you want an advisor, get a bunch, because it's up to you to make the decisions, not your advisor.
Brilliant. And he's also published 30 books, 8 outstanding writing awards, done addresses all around the world. Yeah, but actually, one of the key things we want to talk about is this. So this is Andy's new book. Well, there's a newer one coming in 2 weeks' time, but we'll get onto that in a minute. This is called Leadership from the Middle, and what we want to do today is to spend probably about 20 minutes, if we may, on some of the themes within that book. But before we get there, Stan, what's caught your eye this week?
Well, I think this will just fit into the theme of the book nicely. It was Nick Gibb announcing that the Free Schools programme has introduced far more autonomy and opportunity for teachers at the very same time that the staff are going on strike, basically for autonomy, because they've been told they can't place the bin in the classroom anywhere other than they're told. They mustn't have posters up. They mustn't have lined paper out on the desk. Now, if that's autonomy, I've got a misunderstanding somehow of how that works.
Yeah, because that's actually a bit of a theme, isn't it, Andy, in the book? I mean, I'm thinking here about what made you write it? What made you think about this? Because actually, there's been some discussion about middle leadership, but you're looking at this in a very different sort of way. So just give us a little bit of background as to your thinking.
Sure. I mean, most of my books in the last few years have come out of collaborative work with teachers and with what in England and Wales and Scotland we call local authorities. So our work really follows them, rather than us sitting in a room somewhere and asking for a grant and then going out and recruiting participants. And all this began actually in the province of Ontario more than 10 years ago, when Ontario was focused on narrowing achievement gaps in literacy and maths. And one of the vulnerable groups was students with or kids with learning disabilities. And frankly, at the time, a lot of the government direction was fairly top down. It wasn't bad because it had a specific focus.
Right.
And it had a lot of energy at the top, a lot of funding, resources, materials, support, drive. So if you're focusing on something pretty simple, some top down is really not a bad idea. But it found that for kids with for special educational needs, it's really hard to do from the top down, because needs vary so much between kids. Needs vary so much between local authorities. So some of them were rural, some of them were urban, some of them had a lot of immigrants, some of them had strong indigenous populations. So there's variation also in terms of where you are and who your population is. So the government had no idea what to do. So it said, look, we'll let the local authorities decide this. We'll give them some money. And all they have to do is do something about narrowing these gaps, get some equity, and figure it out for themselves. So they gave them some money, 72 of them. We worked with 10 of them. And through working with these 10, at first we found out how they were approaching it. And basically their language was they did it by leading from the middle. And the way they described this was, we'll get the districts, the local authorities, to each come up with their own solution that fits their own population. So some used technology, some used all other kinds of strategies, some specifically to do with literacy, some with early intervention. And then we would sort of network these strategies together, so that people could help each other. They would have to meet every year and talk about what they'd done and what the results were. Even if the results hadn't gone well, that was useful for them and for other people. And they had a group of like retired, the equivalent in England, Wales and Scotland would be retired directors. And the retired directors really acted as a coordinating unit and said, oh, you're working on something over here. They're doing something over there that might be quite, why don't you connect with them and see how they can support you? So it was focused on equity, focused on outcomes, process varied, highly collaborative, a deliberate architecture to coordinate it, bit of money behind it, but definitely their vocabulary, their idea. Once we started to study that, my colleague Dennis Shirley and I went through a second phase working actually collaborative with the districts to advance that even further. We then started to look out a bit at other people who were writing about middle leadership, and there's lots of people in policy, middle leadership, middle tier, middle level.
Yes.
And what we were seeing was different from a lot of what other people were writing. They were mainly looking at the middle as, I don't know, something like the middle child or middle school, or middle-age spread, like something weird that connects the bottom to the top, and tries to make it so it go a bit more effectively, but not really anything of great substance of its own. So a lot of the book is not just saying the middle is really important. It's also saying we need to look at the middle in a particular kind of way that is empowering, humanistic, inclusive, and respects autonomy and builds collaboration.
Yeah, I was struck by the point you've made there. I remember about 9 months ago, I interviewed Sir Michael Barber, who I think was part of the sort of national literacy program with the Blair government. And it's just triggered something in my thinking there, that he was very proud of this implementation of the national literacy strategy, the national numeracy strategy. I think for Stan and I think we rebelled, to be honest. I think we felt as though it was undermining. I think we knew what we were doing and it was sort of undermining us. But it made me think when you were talking there about, do you think though that in order to make those changes, it was necessary for the government to give a sort of framework so that it wasn't actually just a sort of bit of a free-for-all, everybody works something out for themselves, that they were adapting something that had already been implemented nationally or at least regionally?
Well, Michaal Barber is a bit of a mixed bag, like most of us, and I have debated him at the National College for School Leadership, which was a bit of an event in all kinds of ways. And when I say mixed bag, I mean a genuinely mixed bag. So Ontario, so going back 20 years, but Ontario's model of improving literacy and numeracy and outcomes and inequity was in part inspired by what England had been doing at the time under the advice of Sir Michael Barber. What Ontario, advised by Michael Fullan, specifically tried to do was to keep the focus, the direction, the support, the resources, the materials and the training, but without the heavy hand of punitive inspection.
Yes.
And without quite the same smoke and mirrors in terms of the achievement results, which have been heavily criticized as to how authentic or how fake they were. So in fairness, it was inspired. It was a kind of Michael Barber 2.0, I suppose,
Right.
in a lot of ways. In terms of the middle, I think our book is quite explicitly in disagreement with Sir Michael Barber about under his work with McKinsey and what has followed from that. When he actually talks about the middle being something we need to build because of the top down, there's become too much of a gap between the top and the bottom, and the middle for him is a way of another kind of middle networks is actually a way of replacing local authorities, and quite explicitly says one of its purposes is to remove local dissent from government policies and enable government policies to go more swiftly. So call me old-fashioned. I'm not about removing democracy in order to enhance the top-down authoritarianism. And so we have an explicit difference on that. But at the same time, you could say that when you look at England and the work it did for many years, less common now in terms of local authorities working with each other, or schools working with each other in local authorities, to take collaborative responsibility for each other's success. That was inspired, the first place that did that was the London Challenge. And that was inspired by Sir Michael Barber. So, most of our leaders are a mixed bag, and we have to take the things that they've done well and give them due credit for it. And the things we think they've done less well or in the wrong direction, we have to be honest and debate that.
Well, I think it was just before you come in, so I'll let you come in after this then. But I do remember reading in the section you were critical, not critical, but you explained the journey that a couple of researchers, Michael Fulham was one, how they actually sort of learnt and sort of didn't undermine themselves, but it was just part of the journey of getting a better insight into the impact of some of the work they'd done and how that had affected their thinking moving forward. Stan, what were you going to say?
It's funny you should say Michael. I was just recalling Michael Fulham coming over to England and meeting him, and him saying, "I don't understand how this literacy has taken off so well. What is it? There's no criticism of it. There's no criticism of it at all from any level." And I remember saying to him, "It's because at every level, it's in everyone's interest to say it's going well, because above us all is an Ofsted, and anything you criticize from teacher level right up puts you at risk. So to nod your head and say, yeah, it's going fantastically well, was a very defensive position to be in, but one that saved you from apparent problems later."
Well, I think that's a fair point. And early on in the Ontario strategy, I was very concerned and very critical that it would clone some of the worst parts of the British strategy. The top down, the fake results, and all that. And after a few years, once we started to collect some data and not just had opinion or prediction about what might happen, I remember a conversation between Michael and I. And it was about the fact that he'd been very gung ho and I'd been very critical, and I said, so I've changed my mind now, Michael. So how do you think I've changed my mind? And he said he didn't know. Why should he? So I said, well, the thing is through our research we've discovered actually the literacy strategy is a really good strategy. And that here teachers like it. It's focused. It's not old-fashioned phonics only, but it's a balanced program. It gives them a lot of support. They've discovered actually they didn't know how to teach literacy as well as they thought they could. There's been a lot of interest in teaching and support for teachers and status of teachers, and it's not a compliance model. And so I've learned that the literacy strategy is okay. And I've changed my mind on that. What I've not changed my mind on, and in fact it's even worse, is that the testing strategy is horrendous. So the testing strategy that was taken from the UK is one that really caused all the things that happen in the UK. Teachers focusing on the wrong kids, because that's where the results could go up quickly. So kids who were just near the passing mark, give them a bit of extra attention, extra time. Forget the other kids because they're not going to get there this year. And a lot of that went on. And I think because of the back and forth between Michael and I, and eventually we became advisors together, Michael's view changed on the testing. So he became an advocate with me in terms of really thinking quite differently about the testing. And when you're in this business that Michael and I are in, when in educational leadership, it's important to have both commitment and doubt, and which Graham Greene talked about, and the author. And commitment makes you passionate, makes you want to get things done. It motivates you. It gets you working with other people. Doubt is about not always having all the answers perpetually, about the best way to go about things. And good policymakers, good researchers, good advisors work with some kind of combination, I think, of commitment and doubt.
Andy, how crucial? I'm really interested in the retired directors who formed a sort of communication hub.
Yeah.
Because I think that bit is missing in a lot of strategies that we do. Some people with experience, but not trying to push a particular way of doing things, just connecting.
Yeah, I think what we often get, when Scotland has them at the moment with the regional improvement collaboratives, which frankly I was part of setting up as an advisor in Scotland. And there's been some criticism, which is fair, about how those are operating. And I think the difficulty with them when the local authorities work together is, in some cases, not all, it just becomes another bunch of meetings between all the people at the top. And when they've appointed someone to coordinate them, it's usually been a full-time appointment. So like the old-fashioned challenge advisor we had in the UK, they've got challenge advisors in Scotland. They're there to support you, nudge you, push you a bit. And I think that tends in some ways to reinforce the top-down model, because somebody's job depends on it. If you get a group of people who know what they're doing and have been in the game for a long time, and they're working as a team, which means, again, they're committed, but they don't always completely agree initially on how to go about it. They're respected by people in the system, but they're not in fear of their jobs. I'm an international education advisor. If they don't like my advice, they can fire me. And that's all right. I'll go on to something else, because there's always somebody there who does. And so having a group of people who've done the work, share the values, work as a team, they actually don't usually want to be paid a lot. Like the money's not the big thing. They want to do the work, and they want to continue to make a difference. And I think you're right. I think that, and they're sort of semi-independent. They just want the best for the kids and for the teachers, and it's a good model, I think.
Yeah, I've just seen when we've done in strategies in various local authorities, that seems to be the bit that's missing. The kind of, as you described it, the expert who wants to share views and connect people, but isn't concerned whether they take, not if they take it on or don't take it. I don't mean that, but doesn't feel as though their job's dependent on them. So it's a take it or leave it advice or link up.
Well, I do this in Blackpool, don't I? Do this. I think you've described the job that I do in Blackpool, Andy. So for 3 days a month, I get paid. It's not a massive amount, but actually I am an independent chair of a board that brings everybody together. And the purpose of that is to ensure that we don't have outliers, that everybody is contributing, to the good of Blackpool. And in a way, there's a story developing in the UK at the moment, and I won't go into the detail of it, about particularly a high performing and sort of well known free school. And Mel Ainscough, who you know reasonably well, I think, has tweeted something today just to draw our attention to the dangers of an autonomous school. And in a way, I think a lot of the messaging that you've conveyed within your book is around that ability to connect people together, and for there to be a mechanism for that to happen. Now that has to work both ways, doesn't it? You do need to have somebody who can lean on you to say, to have that honest discussion, say you really are an outlier here. You're not contributing to the greater good, but also just to remind everybody about that is the reason why we're doing it, and it's for the benefit of Burnley or Blackpool or.
And I think something that's in Andy's book as well is not just connecting people up who think the same.
Yes,
it's redundant. If everyone thinks the same in a committee meeting, it might as well not be there.
Yeah.
Well, no, Michael Fulham once said, probably more than once, if there's two of us in the same room and we agree on everything, one of us is irrelevant.
Stan, which one of us is the relevant one?
It'll be me, probably.
I mean, Stan, you drew attention to the final section of Andy's book, the epilogue.
Yeah, what I've said to Frank before we came on air was, whenever we meet, and we have met frequently over the last 20 years or so, I always come away with something that's inspirational. And usually when I come home, if we've been out for a meal or something, Jill always says, I can tell that when you've been talking to Andy Hargreaves, you come back sort of bouncing. And in the book, it was the last chapter, the leadership, the little bit on Lead for Good in the epilogue. I thought was really inspirational. But the other thing that made me really think, and I'm amazed I've never noticed it, is, and I can't remember which section it's in, it's where it talks about the language that we use has been industrial language. Yeah. That was like hitting me like a bolt, because you just think, I've never put that together, that it is all industrial. And yet I've spoken before about, the word manager, which comes from hands-on, and governor comes from a mechanical. So those are all industrial terms, but I never realized just how much.
Levels, tiers, scaling up, driving, delivery. And what really gets to me is like, women in policy and women leaders take on this language of driving, delivery, levels, and so on. And in life, if we speak other people's language, it is disempowering, and it disconnects us with who we are. But we often don't think about the language that we're speaking. It's just there, and so we take it. And so for years I've been saying this, and but I've never really written it down. And Ken Robinson, in one of his last books before, sadly, he left us, talked about agricultural metaphors versus organic metaphors. And agricultural metaphors were a bit like, Russian collectivist farming, which is production targets are going up every year, basically. And, organic metaphors are more in tune with who we need to be as a planet and as a species. They're networked, they're interconnected, they connect mind and body. So when we think of the middle, then it's not just a level or a tier. It is it's the spine, the soul, the heart, the guts. Now you can carry it too far, the spleen, the liver.
Let's stop there before we get into other areas.
All metaphors have their limits, but it gets you, I think, to approach your own leadership in a more grounded, spiritual, connected way, rather than just to be another bolt or lever. And lever is another term we use.
Yes.
within the system.
Well, one of the things I just want to sort of get on to a new book that's going to be published in 2 weeks. But before we do, you're coming over to the UK in January, I believe.
I am indeed. So I'll be at a conference festival in Ireland for a week, an organization I was president of a few years ago. We'll have about 1,000 people there. And then from, I think it's January the 15th to about the 23rd, through the Association of Education Advisors, who, very kindly have put this together, I'll be going through, working around this book, and also a new book with my colleague Dennis Shirley on identity that we can talk about in a few minutes. And it's a bit of a whistle-stop tour, but they're not just speeches, but they're engagements and interactions with other leaders in Belfast, Edinburgh, Newcastle, Cardiff, and London.
Brilliant, brilliant. Well, it's great to have you back over here. I know that, just to say that book, the new book, The Age of Identity, just give us a little insight into what you and Dennis have produced there.
Well, the Age of Identity in some ways comes out of the same work. So we, in the second period of our work with Ontario districts, the policy agenda was very much around two of the four pillars were around equity, understood as inclusion. That it's hard to achieve unless you feel included within the school, and that connects with well-being as well as achievement. And one of the big things they felt, including the Premier, equivalent to the Governor or the Prime Minister right at the top, was that a big part of inclusion was identity. And if you didn't know who you were or couldn't see yourself in the school or had to hide who you were, it's extremely hard to be successful. And so over the last 3 years, Dennis Shirley and I have written 3 books that come out of that work. One on student engagement, one on I should say pupil engagement. If you say students here, students are 5 years old here. And so pupil engagement, pupil well-being, and there you go. And pupil identity. And I'll be quite honest with you, given the firestorms that are around identity at the moment, thanks, Stan, keep them coming. They, like huge firestorms around identity. We actually spent a year not writing this book. We thought, who are we as 2 old white cisgender men to write a book about identity? And for a year we stalled on it, to be honest, because of that. And then eventually we came to the conclusion, well, the reason we're writing about this is not because it's hot and controversial, so hey, we'll write something about this, but we've worked collaboratively with schools. It's their agenda, not ours. Our job is to listen to them, to watch them, to see what we learn, and to read stuff, because as professors, best job in the world, we're paid to read stuff. We're actually paid to read stuff and make sense of it. So we read very contemporary stuff around identity politics, and we've read traditional stuff around the development of identity. So the result of the book is it's not just about our research, but it's a book that tries to help us get through in a world where really what we need is inclusion. What we're experiencing is indignation of different groups against each other. We can see many of these, the white working class against people who are about cultural inclusive diversity, transgender activists against traditional feminists, Hamas against Israel, and all the ways that's playing out through anti-Semitism and Islamophobia. And we could go on and on about these, but where people are fighting each other around identity issues rather than seeing the differences of identity as a resource that can bring people together, and where it's difficult, and it sometimes is, because many of our communities now don't have a single identity. I think it's around 8% of 8 to 10% of families in the UK are mixed race. There is no single category for them. I have 5 grandchildren who are mixed race. None of them look like each other, and there's no box to tick. There's no specific curriculum. They tend not to have anybody who looks like them appear in books, and so what we're basically saying is about 5 things. Could be 6, but we'll see. First is identity is not about them. It's about all of us. Identity matters for everyone. I go all around the world and people say, what you're doing here, as Dennis and I say, we're writing a book about identity. You know, whether it's a hairdresser, a taxi driver, a person in the hotel, a person in the restaurant, a random person on the street, nobody regards that as an uninteresting question. Identity is one of the most important things about being human, and one of the things that's biggest on the bandwidth right now. So it matters for all of us. It is every educator's responsibility, not just to develop their young people's achievements, but also to develop their sense of who they are and what they're part of and what they belong to. And that is what we lost during the pandemic. And teenagers lost that more than anybody else.
Yes.
It was just stripped away from them because they didn't have those and in part, that's why we're seeing huge mental health problems still, random acts of violence, because we've forgotten how to be together. And then we talk about how identities are quite complicated and can be in a joyous way. So the rap star Drake is Black, but he's also Jewish. He also started from the bottom, and my whole team effing here as he sings. He's an advocate for the Toronto Area Code because he's one of the first Canadians who didn't have to go to America to make it big in the entertainment industry. Drake is complicated. You can't just, if he were in your class, you couldn't just respond to him because he was Black or because he was Jewish. You'd have to know the whole of who Drake is. But in our lives and in our schools, we've got this hyper focus now on singularizing people's identities. And that's an insult to people's dignity. Whether we see people only as Black, only as disabled, only as privileged, only as an immigrant, is an insult to their identity and their dignity, because what we see with people isn't what we get. And so there are 2 things that come out of that at the end. I think I've gone through 3, and they are actually, there's 3. One is nobody should have, you know, unless you're Lord Lucan or John Stonehouse, nobody should have to hide who they are. Right? Nobody. Everybody needs to bring the fullness of who they are into school in terms of their gender, their race, their social class, or other things they are, you know, whether they're a twin or whether a teacher's a cancer survivor, or everybody needs to bring the fullness of who they are. We need a whole school to respond to the whole child and that fullness. No teacher can know everything about everybody. It's us together who have to be able to do that. When we do that, we will, you know, a narrative that we've seen our schools use in Ontario that we need to get hold of more is what's essential for some kids is good for all kids, usually. So it's not just about having something for them. Learning on the land for Indigenous kids or sitting in a circle is good for everybody. If you get better toilets for kids who are fluid or non-binary, then you get better toilets for everybody. So schools become more like British Airways. Well, at least in terms, not in terms of being on time, but at least in terms of, at least in terms of what the toilets look like. If we have a better approach to welcoming immigrants, and the evidence in Britain now, by the way, is that more people are in support of immigrants making a positive contribution to British society than against it. So everything's moving in that direction. If you do that in your school, you're also more welcoming to the kid who comes from the other school, or the kid who's come from primary to secondary school, or the kid who's come from another town, or the kid who was one parent and now is with another parent, so they've had to switch schools. So develop this disposition of welcoming our immigrants, and we develop a disposition of welcome. So we need a new narrative about identity, that what's essential for some kids is good for all kids, not we need this for them and this for them, and we come into hermetically sealed groups. And then when things get difficult, when we're dealing with communities who were privileged in some ways and oppressed in others, and most of us are kind of a mixture of that in a way, we need to not run away from it as leaders. We need not to hide the difficult issues. How do we deal with how do we respect religious faith and integrity when that rubs up against, for example, patriarchal values? How do we? And the answer is we don't run away from that. We find a way to talk about it. But as our book sets out, you need some protocols and you need some guiding principles to which we all agree on before we get started. Yes. So that we don't just start tearing into each other and it all ends in tears. So I mean, basically, the book is neither left nor right. And it's not in the middle. It's not a compromise. It's not level. It's sort of between them, up and off a bit is what the book is, to try and get us into a space where we're learning how to be, and even more importantly, we're learning how to live together.
Well,
people want that, don't they, Andy? People want to know about you. Yeah, I mean, I'll guarantee if you go on holiday or you meet somebody, the first question is, where are you from?
Yeah. And then the second question is, what do you do?
Yeah.
And both these are huge parts of our identity.
They are.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you know, I feel as though I don't want to say too much about this book, because I know if we store some of it up, we'll get Andy back for another chat. So what I want to do, Andy, is just thank you for your time today. And also, if I may say, on behalf of a head teacher in Blackpool called Mark Kilmurray, I met him in a hotel a couple of weeks ago. We're at a conference, and he said to me, the most influential person I heard speak to me as I was on my leadership journey was a guy called Andy Hargreaves. And I was able to say to him, well, actually, in a couple of weeks, I'm fortunate to have him as a guest on the Frankenstein chat. I know that Mark would be absolutely so chuffed that I've mentioned his name and raised it with you. So I'm going to leave it.
Can I just somebody who's just started following us, I think, is an old friend of mine, and she's actually responsible for me meeting Andy in the first place. It's a lady called Anne Waterhouse, and she put the work. She put the work together that brought Andy across to do. I think it was something on self-evaluation, and then we came across to Boston to your conference. So I know Anne is watching these now, and I'd like to thank her for a friendship that she created for me that's lasted 20 years now.
Well, can I thank you, Andy, for your time? Thank you, Stan, again. And all being well, we'll be back next week with another guest. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Andy.